Hi everyone, we're going to start in about 5 minutes. So I hope everybody's comfy and you have snacks and drinks. Hi everyone, we're going to start in about 5 minutes. So all right, sorry about the echo there. I think I fixed it. I was apparently broadcasting the thing. So I don't know if anybody. Oh, I see I have one person in the Google Hangout thing. Um, I'm not familiar with this, so this is the first time I've used it. I tested it out a little bit earlier today, but all right. So it looks like it doesn't matter where you are because I guess on the YouTube there's also a live chat too. So we'll use that for questions at the end, and I'll try to check both. On the side of the YouTube video, there's a little thing, and it says live chat, and I type hi everyone. And then if you're in the Google Hangout, there's a blue button that says chat, and that I used that and I said hi there. So either way, you can ask questions there, and then I'll go to those at the end of the thing. Does everybody see the chat thing? Can you say hi or something just so I know it's working? It's the first time I've used this. All right, okay, so it looks like we have about 16 people on. I don't know how many people are going to be around to watch it live, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Paige Lyon. I am one of the Flourish experts, and I am an expert in photography, graphic design, and branding. I've been a professional photographer for over 10 years. I do child portrait photography, so this is a picture of my daughter. So that's the main type of photography that I've done until recently. I did do some product photography before my kids were born. I actually did these crazy pictures of cats with wine bottles, but I didn't have any of those to show you that I could find on my computer. So, and I learned photography at a young age. I was probably like about 11 or 12, and my mom had some old film SLR cameras that she gave to me. She was an art teacher, and she let me just play around with them. And so that's how I learned a lot, and I learned on film. And then I stopped doing photography for a while, and then I picked it back up when I was in high school, and I got my first digital camera, and that's when I really fell in love with photography. I think because of somewhat like the instant gratification, because with film you had to get stuff developed and all that good stuff. So today I'm going to be talking to you about the exposure triangle. And as an expert in Flourish, I get tagged on a lot of photography questions. And since I'm an expert in a couple of different areas, I can say that I get tagged a lot more photography questions than I get tagged for anything else. And so I know that photography is really really difficult for a lot of people. And I think what a lot of it comes down to is people don't really understand the basics of how you get a well-exposed picture. Because when I see pictures that are posted in Flourish and they're unedited, I'm usually seeing really overexposed pictures, but more often than not, I'm seeing really underexposed pictures. So when Sarah was looking for people to do presentations for Photography Month, I really wanted to talk about the exposure triangle because this is the basis of photography. If you understand the exposure triangle, you understand how to manipulate your camera into getting the type of image you want, you'll spend a lot less time editing. This is how using the exposure triangle is how you get a picture that's right in camera the first time. So what is the exposure triangle? I'm just going to move right into it. The exposure triangle refers to the three elements or camera settings that relate to light and how light enters your camera. These three elements are your ISO, which is the measure of the digital camera's sensor sensitivity to light. Then there's the aperture, which is the size of the opening in your lens when a picture is taken. So the opening opens and closes and lets in more or less light. Then you have the shutter speed, which is the amount of time that your shutter is open. It's at the intersection of these three elements that an image's exposure is worked out. And the most important thing that I think people forget, and the most important thing I want you to take away from this presentation, is that none of these elements work in isolation. So if you change one of the elements, it impacts all of the other elements. So you always have to kind of know what you have to know what all three of these are doing in your camera in order to get a properly exposed image. So obviously this, aperture, shutter speed, and ISO, you can utilize this fully if you have a manual camera. If you don't have a manual camera, a camera that can shoot in manual, then there's a couple things that you can do. A lot of point and shoot cameras, if you look in your settings, you'll be able to control some things. Now, I know my mother-in-law has like the cheapest little Nikon point and shoot, and even she can go into the settings and control the ISO. With camera phones, I know there's an app on Android and there's an app for iPhone that's called Camera Plus, and you can control some of the settings on your camera, so that will allow you to get a little bit more manual control over your camera. And then obviously digital SLRs allow you the most flexibility. So, just keep that in mind when I'm talking about these things. So if you don't have a camera that can use all of these right now, at least knowing the basis of it will allow you to isolate the elements that you can control and still make well-exposed images. And I don't know if I said this already, but if you have any questions, you can go ahead and type them as we go along, and then I will go back and try to answer the questions at the end, because it's just me, so I don't have anybody to watch the chat while I'm doing this. So I'm going to start, and I'm going to break down all of the elements of the exposure triangle and how they control light. So the first element we're going to talk about is the ISO, or the ISO. And if you remember having a film camera, you'll remember that you could buy film at different speeds. So there was like 400 speed film and 200 speed film, and all of that related to how sensitive the film was to light. Sorry. In digital photography, the ISO refers to the digital camera's sensor's sensitivity to light. So with your ISO, you can see on the chart here, the lower the ISO, the less noise you're going to have in an image. And then as you go up in ISO, you're going to end up getting some noise or grain or whatever you want to call it. Now with most cameras today, digital cameras are becoming better and better at being able to handle higher ISOs. I would say with most consumer cameras, so that would be like the Nikon 5200 or a Canon Rebel series, you can probably go up to an ISO of around 800 as long as your image is properly exposed without getting too much grain. So as you can see here in the first image, I have in the first image, this was shot at an ISO of 320. In the second image, the ISO was shot at 25,600, which was really extreme. And I did that just to show a lot of noise. And you can't see it very well here. So you can't, whoops, let me go back. You can't see it very well here. So I'm going to zoom in here real quickly. So this is noise. And as you can see, the picture just isn't as crisp along the edges of the egg. It has this digital color noise. It just looks kind of ugly. So where this picture is, smooth and there isn't any noise. So that's what the ISO, that's the caveat of having a high ISO. But it also allows you more light. So if you are shooting at an ISO of 100, you're going to probably be shooting indoors with studio lights, or you'd be shooting outdoors in very bright sun. On the other side, if you're shooting indoors and you're shooting in natural light, you're going to have to bump up your ISO to allow some more light in, probably. The next thing we're going to talk about is aperture. And aperture refers to the measure of how open or closed the iris of your lens is. It's reported in numbers that are referred to as f-stops. So if you hear a camera, a photographer talking about f-stops or stopping up and down, that's referring to the aperture, raising or lowering the aperture. The lower your f-stop number is, the wider the iris of the lens is. So when the lens is wider, it's letting in more light. And then as you step down, the iris is closing and is letting in less light. Aperture also controls the depth of field. And this is where things get really exciting, because I believe that aperture and knowing how to control the depth of field is one of the most important elements in taking your image from looking like a snapshot to a professional image. So narrow apertures or higher f numbers give greater depth of field, and that's going to allow for more of the scene to be in focus. And this is really great for landscape photography, or if you were taking a picture, a detailed picture of a brooch on a necklace or something, and you wanted all of the detail of all of the stones to be in focus, you may want to shoot at a higher aperture. Wider apertures or lower f numbers create a shallow depth of field, which can help isolate a subject. And this technique is often used for product photography. So if you've seen, lots of pictures of, like there's one photographer I can think of, and she really utilizes shallow depth of field a lot. Her name is Meg Bitton, and she's a child portrait photographer. So you may not know about her, but but if you go look at her page, and if you want an example of what shallow depth of field is, her pictures are a perfect example of using shallow depth of field. So for product photography, using a shallow depth of field can be great for isolating your product and drawing the viewer's eyes straight to your product. So if you make coffee mugs, you can still have, a nice stage shot of your coffee mug. Let's say you stage your house to look like a little coffee shop, and you can have the mug on the table. But by using a shallow depth of field or a lower aperture, you can make sure that just that mug is in focus and everything else kind of blurs out. So then when a viewer is looking at that product photo, their eye is directly drawn to your cup. So this is a really important compositional tool that you can use to really make your product photography appeal to your buyers. So taking these two pictures here, in this picture over here, just the egg is in focus. So this is a really shallow depth of field, and this was taken at f2, so an f-stop of 2. In this picture, all of the eggs are kind of in focus, like this one's kind of out of focus, but as you can see, it's definitely more in focus than it is over in this picture, and this picture was taken at f11. So that's aperture and how you use that, and that's depth of field. Sorry, I'm going to take a drink real quick. Okay. So lastly, we have shutter speed. And I think shutter speed is pretty easy to understand. It's, because you hear when you click a camera, you hear the shutter. The shutter speed is the amount of time that the shutter is open. Slow shutter speed can cause motion blur, while a fast shutter speed stops motion. So shutter speed is measured in fractions of seconds. A faster shutter speed gives the sensor less time to collect light, and so it's going to result in a lower exposure. A slower shutter speed allows more time for the sensor to collect light, and as a result, it's going to have a higher exposure. In product photography, you can really utilize your shutter speed to let more light in, especially if you're doing natural light photography in your house. because you can put your if you're taking a picture of if you're taking a picture of something inside and it's a stationary object, you can just put your camera on a tripod and use the remote, and so you can use a really low shutter speed and still get a lot of light in without getting motion blur. On the flip side, though, if you're shooting model photography and let's say your model is a fidgety toddler, then you're going to have a higher shutter speed to make sure that you don't have motion blur when they're moving around. There are not a lot of hard and fast rules about shutter speed, but I do want to say one rule that I kind of follow, and you may find it different for you, depending on how steady your hands are. But with handheld photography, I don't like to go lower than 1/60th of a second. So that would be 1/60, 1/60 for stationary objects, or 1/160th of a second for taking portrait photography of people, just because I know if I go any lower, my hands aren't as steady and I might get a little bit of motion blur. Now, in these two images here, this first image was taken at 1/250th of a second. It was handheld photography, but as you can see, there's no motion blur. The second image was taken at 1/2 of a second, and there, I just kind of moved my hand. I mean, I kind of exaggerated it to get the blur on the picture, but I just moved my hand ever so slightly, and you see you have the little ghost eggs there. So, so definitely, if you were going to shoot that low, you would want your camera or your phone to be on a tripod and be shooting with a remote. All right, so those are the three elements of the exposure triangle. So now I want to bring it all together and how these all work together in creating your image. So the ISO, your aperture, and the shutter speed all combined create the exposure for your image. The reason it's called an exposure triangle is because none of the elements can be changed in isolation. So if you change one of the elements, it will affect the other two elements in a constant triangle. And so right now you might be thinking, well, where do I start? Do I set my ISO? Do I set my shutter? Like, what do I do? Because now it's just a bunch of numbers. How do I make it all work together? So for me, it's going to depend on how much light you have. But for me, I like to start by controlling my depth of field. Because the depth of field is kind of, depending on what you're taking a picture of, you'll know whether you want, a very focused background where everything is in focus, or you want things slightly out of focus. So I always kind of start with my aperture and what type of effect I'm trying to get with my depth of field. So we're going to look at this first image here. Now you'll see these two images are similarly exposed, but they have different numbers here at the bottom. So in this first image, I just wanted this blue egg in focus. I didn't want anything else in focus. So with this, I started with my aperture at 2.0, knowing that I wanted the other eggs out of focus. Then I set my shutter for 1/250th of a second, because I like to go a little higher with my shutter, because sometimes my hands are kind of shaky. So, and I was doing this handheld, so I went with 1/250th of a second just so I had plenty of wiggle room. And then I had to bump up my ISO until I got it properly exposed, and I ended up at 320. So that's how I exposed this image. Now on this image, I wanted all three eggs more in focus. I wanted you to see detail on each of the three eggs. So I started with an f-stop of 11. So I then, knowing that the lowest I can go with my shutter without getting motion blur, I took this all the way down to 1/60th of a second. And then I had to raise the ISO until I got it properly exposed. So I raised it to 2500. Now this was kind of a dreary day, and so I had to go up to 2500 because that was that was like as high as I could go without getting a lot of noise. Now I have a professional grade camera, so I can go really high with my ISO without getting a ton of grain. You're probably not going to be able to do that with your camera. So probably what I should have done was gone to the closet and pulled out my tripod and put the camera on the tripod so I could lower my shutter speed more and then be able to lower the ISO down to 800. So that's how they all work together. You have to kind of make a judgment call on what you want the outcome of your image to be, and then what you can compensate with. So if you know that you have to go up to a minimum of f11 to have everything in focus the way you want it to go, you know that you're going to need to let more light in using the shutter speed and the ISO. So it's just all trade-offs, and they all kind of work together. And with these two images, they're similarly exposed, but the process taken to get there was completely different. So that's kind of how they work together. So I hope that all made sense. I hope I didn't go too fast. And I'm going to go through and I'm going to look at questions and see what questions people have. Okay, so Catherine asked, the person's name for the shallow depth of field photographer is Meg Benton. She is, now she's not a product photographer, she's a child photographer. But all of her images have a very shallow depth of field. So if you wanted to see examples of what shallow depth of field is, you can look her up. And then Catherine also asked, so aperture and product photography, F2 focus on coffee mug. If your image gets bigger, i.e. a dog on a blanket, do you increase the aperture because larger image? Okay, so, all right. So yes, if you have a lower aperture, and I'm not always saying F2 needs to be the lowest you would go to get shallow depth of field, because you can get shallow depth of field at a higher aperture. It just depends on like your surroundings and the type of lens you have and everything, which is getting way too technical for this. But so if you were taking a picture of a dog on a blanket, you may want a higher f-stop, because you may want the whole blanket in focus and the whole dog. But if you were taking a picture of maybe, just because I also know you do dog bandanas, you may want a lower f-stop to kind of get more of a close-up of the dog with this bandana on. So it depends on what you're taking, and it depends on the effect that you want. I mean, either could be fine, but it also kind of goes with branding. The shallower depth of field pictures have a bit of a softer look to them. So if that goes along with your branding and your branding's a little softer, then maybe you always want to shoot at a lower aperture. So I hope that answered your question. All right, and then I'm going to pop over to the other thing. Okay. All right. Okay, so Amanda says she's always looking for tips on taking photos of jewelry. Taking photos of jewelry, I think, can be difficult. I don't know specifically what you want, but if you can maybe, I see that you also said is deeper depth of field for jewelry if there isn't one thing on the piece that needs to be highlighted. I would say, like, if you're taking a picture of a necklace, for example, you may use a shallower depth of field, so you just focus on maybe the pendant of the necklace, and then the chain blurs out behind it. But it kind of depends on what you're taking a picture of. But, let's say you were taking pictures of two earrings, and you have them kind of, like, you see how my eggs are in a diagonal? Like, let's say those are earrings. Really, you'd want the two earrings in focus, even though they were at a diagonal. But if you were taking, a picture of earrings and they were both on the same plane, right next to each other, you may shoot at a lower aperture because you're just focusing on those specific earrings and you want everything else to blur out. So it does depend on what you're taking a picture of, and how you want that picture to turn out. Let's see. Product photography on a person in a mannequin. Okay, so I don't know, like specifically, I guess if you could say like specifically what you mean about product photography on a person or on a mannequin. I know when I shoot pictures of people, I tend to shoot at a shallow depth of field. This is a picture of my daughter, and let me see if I can find another. Okay, let me see if the settings are on here. Here we go. Nope, they're not. Oh, yes, they are. Okay, so this was taken with a 135 millimeter camera or meter lens, and this was taken at an f-stop of 4.5. But as you can see, it's still there's still a lot of focus. So, it's blurred out in the back. So, like when I take pictures of people, or I was taking if this was a product photo, and let's say she had a headband on, I would still want it to be the shallow depth of field because I'd want that headband. I mean, I might go a little, because you can see all of her hair and everything is still in focus. So like, let's imagine there's a headband on here. Then I would want to make sure that the headband was in focus, but maybe I want to blur out everything else. So if I was shooting at a lower aperture in this photo, like I would probably just have like her eyes in focus and you'd see like less focus in her hair. So it depends on, what you're taking a picture of. And actually maybe this, I don't know, that's not a better picture. Okay, so here's a picture. So if this could be a picture for this flower headband. So you can see, I don't know, if I was taking a picture of a headband, I'd probably do something like this because, she's down low, so she's not really the focus, like the headband kind of comes out. So it's almost like, your eye does kind of draw to the headband, if that makes sense. Okay, if you change one of these elements, I'm sorry, I'm flipping back to questions. If you change one of these elements, do you have to change the other two elements, or does the camera do that for you? And that was Lisa. So the answer to that depends on what your camera is set at. If your camera is set at manual, then you're going to have to change the other two settings. If your camera is set in something like aperture priority, where you're only changing the aperture, then your camera does make the decision for you on the other two elements. Okay, and then okay, and then Brittany, I hope I answered your question for the product photography. I see that you need accessories. Okay, so Amanda says that she wants light, bright, and clear. Well, the best way to get pictures light and bright is to have them properly exposed. Because when a photo is properly exposed, even if it's on a dark background, you don't have, I mean, everything just kind of looks even, and you don't have, you don't want things too overexposed to where you have clipping, and that's where, your whites are too white. You don't want things underexposed where you have clipping on the other end where your blacks are too black, and it kind of makes things look dingy. So getting a photo properly exposed is the best way to get things to look light, bright, and clear, because if an image is properly exposed, it also looks sharper, and just it just overall looks better. Okay. All right, it looks like Catherine has another question, lightbox photography. Do the general rules change at all when you don't have true natural light? No, I mean, the rule, I mean, setting your exposure and using the exposure triangle refers to your available light. So if your available light is natural light, I mean, if you're shooting outside on a bright sunny day, you have a lot of that's natural light and you have a lot of it, so you can shoot at a lower ISO. If you're shooting inside with like a light box and you have a lot of light, it's not natural light, but you still have a lot of it, so you can still shoot at a lower ISO, or a higher shutter speed, or a narrower aperture. So light is light. Where the different types of light kind of make more of an effect is in white balance, but that's like a whole subject for another day. All right, Lisa asked, what is a good tutorial for learning how to use the Canon Rebel? I mean, YouTube is always great. I don't know any off the top of my head. I would say the first place to start is if you have the camera manual, to really make sure that you read through that, because that will, that'll explain what all the buttons do, what all the dials do, all of that. So that would be a really good way to start. And then, the rules, like the exposure triangle and setting your aperture and setting your shutter speed and setting your ISO, I mean, other than maybe the buttons being different on a Canon Rebel versus, a Nikon, it doesn't really matter which camera you switch between. The rules are the same, and you would still use the same settings. So, you're welcome, Amanda. I hope it was helpful. Okay. All right, so I know there's a little bit of a delay, so I'm just going to wait a couple of seconds and see if there are any other questions. And if not, then I guess that will be all. And then if you think of questions, I think you can ask them on the Flourish thread. On the Flourish thread, there's one thing I forgot, and I know people are leaving, but if anybody's still on, don't leave, because I did want to show you, and I will put a link to this in Flourish. I found this really great tool, which is an interactive exposure tool, and it's so cool. You can basically play with the three, your shutter speed, your aperture, and your ISO, and see how those things, so this is a picture of a fan, and so let's say I want to stop the motion of the fan. I'm going to have to go up in my shutter speed, but as I go up in the shutter speed, you can see that the aperture and the ISO haven't changed, so that means my picture is getting too dark. So then what I have to do is I have to bump up my ISO, but as you can see, as I bump that up, it starts to make things a little grainy. But by putting the shutter speed up to 1/2000th of a second, I was able to stop the motion of the propeller. So if I lower but then if I start to bring down my shutter speed, I get a way overexposed image. But let's say I don't want my ISO that high, I want my ISO lower, I want my aperture a little wider because I want to get those lights in focus. I have to bring, I have to adjust all of the three things. So I will link to this too, because this is really cool and you can play around with it. I'll link to this over on Flourish, but okay, and then Catherine says we need one on white balance. Yes, I will think about doing something on white balance because I think that would be very helpful too. Okay, I'm going to post the link here in both the chats just so you have it. And then I will also post it on Flourish. And I'll, I think I can edit this video a little bit and put some links in there. Somebody, I don't know if the person is watching the video, but somebody asked about, iPhones, like how to do things for iPhones. And there is an app called Camera Plus, and I can actually do tutorials on my iPhone, so I'll have to make a tutorial for it. But you can use this app called Camera Plus. You can't adjust the aperture on it because the iPhone has a fixed aperture, but you can control the shutter speed and the ISO, so that'll at least let you manipulate some things. So I'll post that link too. But I think we may be done. I don't see any more questions. So thank you so much for sticking around and watching me. I hope this was clear for you. What would be, oh, okay, see another question real quick. What would be good settings for bright sunny days outside? Well, again, it depends on what you're taking a picture of and what you want your depth of field to be. So, I mean, if you were taking a picture of, you know, let's say you're taking a picture of a mug outside. I just keep going back to the mug, I guess. But if you're taking a picture of a mug outside and you want just the mug to be in focus and you want everything else in your yard to be out of focus, I would start with, you know, putting the aperture down lower and lower f-stop number. And I'd start there. And then, you know, I'd probably, you know, have my ISO as low, you know, depending on if it was like handheld or, you know, handheld or on a tripod, I'd probably go down to, you know, if it was handheld, I just like being around like 1/200th of a second when I'm doing handheld. So I'd probably put my shutter up to 200, and then I'd bring the ISO down as low as it could go. So if it's really bright and sunny, you may be out, you know, you may be able to go down to 100 or 200. Usually when I'm shooting outside, if it's, you know, right when the sun is out and bright, I mean, I'm probably somewhere around like 320 and 600. But again, it just depends on, you know, what I'm taking a picture of. And really, these things start to become second nature to you. I mean, I can walk outside and I have a really good idea of what my settings are going to be. So the more you play with this, the more you'll find, the more you'll find that this becomes second nature to you. All right, so I think that's all. I'm going to go ahead and end it for now. Thanks for sticking around, everyone. If you have more questions, go ahead and post them under the post in Flourish, and I will get back to you. My voice is starting to hurt. Oh, wait, I just saw, how do we know when we are looking at the camera image if it, all right. Okay, so Jennifer asked, how do we know when we are looking at the camera image if they were properly exposed? It seems when I download my pictures on my computer, they look much darker or much brighter than I thought. I'd have to know if you're shooting in RAW. This happens sometimes when you're shooting in RAW because the back of your camera is, it's not showing you the RAW image, it's showing you a JPEG image. Like, it's not even showing you a JPEG. It's basically just showing you an image where they kind of made the settings because you can't really look at RAW images on the back of the camera. So I would assume that that's what's going on because your camera is basically doing, it's making some settings to it. So So, I mean, there's not really a great answer for this. So, basically, if something's still, like, I mean, you should be able to look at the histogram on your camera, and the histogram will tell you, even if it's not, and I don't know if you know what a histogram is. So the way that you figure this out, and I don't know if there's like a camera setting that you can fix on your camera. I know that some people, if they have like, I think Canon Rebels do this, because I've heard people say this before. I don't have that problem with my camera. Pretty much whatever I take the picture on the back of it looks pretty much the same. It may be like where you need to change, maybe adjust, like kind of calibrate the brightness of the back of your camera to the brightness, to what it looks like on your computer. It may be that your computer screen isn't calibrated. There's a lot of things that can go into this. I know on my camera and on my computer, I'm working with a calibrated monitor. So I don't have, I mean, when I look at something on my camera screen and I look at it on my computer, it looks pretty much the same. So you're probably just going to have to play around with like the brightness settings of your LCD on your camera, and then play around with your computer. And if your computer monitor isn't calibrated, I would look up how to calibrate it, because that could be part of the issue too. But again, that's kind of like a whole nother can of worms. Computer calibration is kind of a whole nother can of worms and gets kind of confusing too. So those would be the things that I would look at and kind of troubleshoot that, and see where you get with that. I'm sorry if that wasn't super helpful, but I mean, if you want, you can send me like a raw file, and you can message me on Facebook. And if you want to send me like a raw file, I can take a look at it and say, like, this is on my computer, this looks underexposed or overexposed. There's also a histogram on your camera, and I always use the histogram too to know if an image is properly exposed. But that kind of goes outside of this training. So if you want to message me, I can get you information on how to look at the histogram on your camera, and I can also take a look at your raw files. I am starting to lose my voice, so I'm going to say goodnight, and I will be typing my answers here over on the Flourish thread if you have any more questions. So just follow me over there. I'm going to stop the broadcast now. So thanks so much, guys. Have a nice evening. Bye.